Thank you, B. Yeah, we'll see how I'm not that great at timekeeping, so we'll see how that 40 minutes goes. But that's the aim, and yeah, I'll try and allow plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion and stuff. Firstly, just wanted to say thank you to Sparrow for his persistence in getting me to come and talk. Haven't been in previous years, mainly because it's always clashed with my son's birthday. And that's the son that has no interest in veg growing or farming. Now it's in the middle of August, which is equally an awful time of year to come. But a pleasure to be here nonetheless. So yeah, when Sparrow asked me if I wanted to do a talk, I kind of had a few ideas, and then I can't actually remember what the title of this talk is, but it's something to do with Till, which is like, yeah, I absolutely will be talking about that, but there'll be lots of other things weaved into it. And I suppose what I want to do is talk about the way we've changed how we grow over the years. About focusing on observing and learning through observing and adapting to our specific conditions on the farm as well. Looking at how we've changed from what I would say were fairly conventional cultivations to a more kind of considered approach. And hopefully this will give you a kind of a bit of an idea of how we generally come to make decisions with the business as a whole as well, and how we've got to where we are today. Also just want to say that want to make it clear that everything I'm talking about is just through our experiences. So I absolutely, all of this stuff that we do, I don't believe in the kind of one way of doing things. There's not like one size fits all approach for veg growing. So this is what we do, but I don't. It's like when I run courses at the farm, I never want people to go away from it thinking like, right, I'm going to do exactly that and transfer all of it to my farm, because it just doesn't work like that. And I think there's so many factors that play into how a certain approach to veg growing works. Obviously, soil type, scale, access to market, and also actually really importantly, kind of personal preferences, how you like to do things yourself. All of those things really have a big influence on what approach suits different people. Having said that, I do believe there's like really key skills that help in making it work. So like I said, observation, problem solving, being organized, being able to prioritize tasks, and also slightly annoyingly having to be hardworking as well seems to be quite a crucial part of it. And yeah, another thing just to say when I talk about market garden being how to make it a success, I'm not necessarily, I'm using that term fairly loosely, and it's important to say that we are, even after 15 years of doing it, still really struggling to make it work financially. That's something that I think it's really important to talk about. Maybe there'll be time to chat about that towards the end as well. I think we're often seen as a market garden that is successful, and maybe some people aren't aware that it's still really, really hard to make it work for us. So yeah, don't think don't think we're making it work perfectly. Yeah, basically. Anyway, so moving on to the talk itself. This photo here I found at my parents' last year and took a photo of it. That's my grubby fingernail in the corner. So the relevance of this is that I am this small child in the corner. I think I would have been 2 years old then, and this is where my parents grew veg in Sussex, and this was just after the 1987 storm. So all of their glass houses were smashed to pieces, exactly. So that was my sort of playground for a few years. I guess was like weirdly the thing that was so pivotal in influencing me wanting to do the similar sort of thing, even though it was kind of looked like this. So yeah, brought up. My parents were growing veg from the kind of mid 1980s organically. I chose to then study horticulture at Reading University. Not necessarily with the intention of actually going into veg growing, and I veered more towards historical garden restoration. That was kind of what got me at university, and ended up working really close to here. I was gardening for Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. That's what I did just before I became a veg grower. For a couple of years doing that. And then an opportunity came up at Trill. So that was, in 2010. And I was 24 then. And we kind of, we jumped at it. There was a market garden kind of that had already been sort of half set up by the landlady of the farm at that time. So we moved there and then had our first kid. Oh, I'm just going to put the timer on so I get a rough idea. Okay, I'll do it as well just so I can. We had our first kid that September of that year. So it was all kind of like quite, it was a big year, I suppose. And we were relatively young and probably very naive. But I guess both myself and my partner Kate, we come from both my parents and her parents were self-employed. Mine veg growers and Kate's market traders. So I think the idea of setting up a business and being self-employed wasn't particularly daunting, because that just felt like the normal thing to do, which I can understand that being maybe off-putting for people who aren't brought up with that. And I would say we've also never been the sort of people who have we've never had these like long-term plans, when people say, I've got a 5-year, 10-year plan. We haven't. We've kind of usually got a plan for the next day. And equally have been, whether this is a good thing or not, we've never ever had a business plan. So this is 15 years in. The reason I'm saying all of this stuff rather than talking about Min-Till at the moment is because I think it's really relevant to the decisions that we've made over the years and where we are today. I just think it's an important thing to say. And so I think it's not necessarily the most conventional way to run a business, not having particularly clear plans for the future. But I suppose we're much more focused, and Calixta said the word earlier, and I thought, that's us. Much more intuitive as growers, I would say. And that goes through looking at the crops and seeing. I've never particularly been one I have done soil tests in the past, but I often get the results back and kind of go, oh, and then put them on the desk, and then other things pile up on them. I tend to be looking at the crops and being like, "Oh, something's not quite right there," and that's just hopefully painting a bit of a picture of how things work in my head. So yeah, I would say that kind of approach has kind of been the foundation of how we run our business in many ways. There's also another massive factor involved in how we run our business, which is having 2 kids, and that has really has influenced the way we run our business, whether it was from the kids being in the van doing deliveries when they were little, or more so now it's like we're like a mega cricket family, so it's like 5 times a week there's cricket games going on. So it's like, okay, got to finish work at 4:30. Either I'm playing or the kids are playing, or I'm coaching one of them. And that, again, might be like, you might be like, why the hell is he talking about this? But it's all really, all these things just have a massive impact on how you decide to run your business, I think. And they're really, maybe, I guess they're not in the books. This is the thing. They're not, all this stuff isn't written down in all these glossy books about veg growing. But for me, they're probably, the most important things actually that kind of influence how we run the market garden. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the market garden, and then go more into the sort of changes that we've made over the years in terms of the growing methods. So originally we're on a 300-acre market garden, and when we came to Trill 15 years ago, we just rented this 2.5-acre field here, and we've more recently taken on another 2.5 acres 3 years ago. So it's 5 acres that we rent, and yeah, on a bigger 300-acre farm. It's grade 3B land, which actually I looked up for the first time what that meant relatively recently, and it said something like land that can produce moderate yields of a narrow range of crops, such as grass. So that's what we've been growing on for 15 years. Basically, it's not appropriate for growing veg. And actually, so Tolly was, when we came to Trill, he had kind of consulted our landlady before we got there on where to put a market garden, and helped her set it up and stuff. And he always said it was very marginal land. You're never going to turn over more than £30,000 from it. Basically, it's not great. It's very heavy soil. However, obviously, there's massive benefits to that, especially in a dry year like this. Holds on to moisture well, and is fairly fertile. The problem is it's often not like this, and so poorly drained soil. That's our kind of, I would say, probably our biggest limiting factor for veg growing. And because of that, the range of crops that we can grow is fairly restricted. It's also kind of restricted in terms of the scale, I guess, with it only being 5 acres, but also the kind of shape of the fields, especially this field. You can't really get long beds unless you're going down the gradient. So it's not particularly suited to mechanization, or more kind of what we think of as more field scale, more of a field scale approach. And so, yeah, we've focused on, basically over the years, we've focused on growing higher value crops. That kind of makes sense on a small scale. We're also really close to, like Lyme Regis, really touristy town. So it made sense from the early days to focus on selling stuff to the cafes and restaurants and stuff around there. And that's how that's up until COVID, basically, that about 95% of our produce went to cafes and restaurants locally. That's now about 60%, and we set up a box scheme in March 2020. Obviously, we basically lost all of our customers because they closed in lockdown, so we set up a box scheme, and now we're selling through that as well. So we have it's usually about 80 boxes a week, and then what we call the wholesale, so the cafes, shops, and restaurants. And it's about 60% to cafes, shops, and restaurants, and 40% in terms of turnover. So, yeah, when we arrived at Trill, that original 2.5 acre field, it had been fenced, deer fencing and rabbit-proof fencing. There was the twin span tunnel was there, which is still there in this corner here. And there was a borehole for irrigation as well. And then there was also an old Massey 135 and a few implements for that. And so it's kind of like ready for us just to get cracking straight away. We moved there February 2010. So yeah, we could just get started for that season without thinking too much about investing money in it. So it felt like a really risk-free opportunity for us. Which was great as young growers. This was about a year later. We picked up a couple of tunnels. It became fairly quickly apparent that the soil was very heavy, and that polytunnels were going to play a big part in our business. So the first 2 tunnels we took down from, I was brought up on it was a council small holding, so it was a lane where there were maybe somewhere between 10 and 15 small holdings in Sussex, all of about like somewhere between 3 and 5 acres each. Oh no, there were a couple that were bigger actually because they were dairies. That was where I grew up. And then now there's only one, actually the one that I grew up on is still council owned. All the others have been sold. Most of them have been built on, so it's all housing now. But these 2 tunnels were going to be skipped because there were houses being built there. So we picked them up for free in the first autumn that we were at Trill and put them up. One of them is like a dedicated propagation tunnel, and then other one just for growing more veg. Now, like over the years, basically we added more and more tunnels, and I think it's about 0.4 of an acre of tunnels that we have. There's, I think there's 9 of them, and they're definitely key to making the business work. A really important part of it. When we arrived at Trill, we basically used a very conventional approach to convert some of the pasture. Some of it had been grown on for kind of one season as well, but we got someone in to do some ploughing, and then we had, you can see the back of the Massey, and that's a power harrow on that. So basically we just ploughed and power harrowed, and that was our approach for prepping beds. And yeah, we did that for, I don't know how many, like certainly a few years. And we started to notice problems. That's again, like basically it's fairly obvious when there's problems with drainage, and the crops show it. The crops show it, but obviously also the land shows it, and the water just sticks around for a lot longer. So we started noticing that not so much compaction that you get on clay, but it's like the smearing. And what was happening really was that we were cultivating. We were always too tempted to cultivate too early, and obviously being on a small scale like this, trying to produce as many high value crops as possible, and the pressure of making it work financially, it's always like trying to prep those beds early on, and cause damage doing that. On lighter soils, you can get away with that, but not on ours. So yeah, fairly quickly, the first few years, started noticing more and more problems with the drainage. And yeah, so I'm gonna sort of run through the, I guess, the like timeline of or our different approaches from then until now, and kind of explain why we've gone through that. But it's all really been trying different things, and goes back to that thing of me saying, I guess we never had. The thing is, actually, when we started out as well, there were probably only 3 growing books around or something. So there weren't loads of. There wasn't loads to read about it. There weren't loads of ideas that were easily accessible at that point. And that's another important thing to mention. Obviously, there's loads of stuff now, and you can take bits and pieces from all of it. So yeah, what we started doing after the first few years, noticing these problems with the poor drainage, was we started prepping early beds that we were planting up, say from like mid-March to mid-April or something like that. We were putting down silage plastic on the beds all through the winter, trying to keep them sort of dryish, killing off old crops and weeds, and then taking the plastic off and then planting straight into that. And yeah, there was kind of like, obviously that took away the necessity of ploughing or cultivating, but also meant that we were covering the soil with black plastic for a long time, and it still wasn't great. Obviously, not having living roots in the soil for that length of time, like over all through winter, and the effect of the rain through winter, basically compacting the plastic, and you still have that effect, not quite as much as having bare soil, but it's definitely not ideal. We started using like council green waste, in the hope that would kind of give the soil or the microbes something over winter, whilst it was plasticked. And it kind of helped a little bit, but also we were sort of, after a few years of doing that, we were questioning it and weren't quite sure about it. And then there was one, I don't know what year it was, but there was quite a dry spring that we just tried out. Basically, we stopped ploughing and we started doing. I don't know if people call it this, skim tillage. Is that a thing? I call it that anyway. Basically, going along fairly shallow. Bear in mind, we just had a few implements for the tractor, and we were just trying to get by with what we had. So we were tilling really quite shallow with the power harrow on the tractor in a dry spring that was killing off old crops and weeds, if there were a few weeks of dry, you could do it a couple of times, and they would dry out and die, and we weren't having to invert the soil anymore. At this point as well, it's important to say that there weren't huge problems with perennial weeds. We had quite a problem early on with creeping thistle, but that had gone by then through cultivation, I think. So doing this, the kind of skim tillage, sort of worked for us, but obviously that relies on a period of time when the ground's dry early on in the spring, which just it's not reliably like that. This year we had it, but it's rarely like that. So yeah, we'd made a few changes, but we were still seeing problems with drainage. We then had a friend down the road had a bed former, and I thought, oh well, let's try and raise the beds. That's just a picture of us using some council green waste before plasticking as well. These beds here, you can see how sort of the ones on the left of the screen that we've used the bed former on, and it was like that was kind of weirdly perfect, but deep down, I always felt a little bit sick using it. It's a bit so I knew there was something not quite right, but God, the planting, it was so quick to plant into those beds because it was so sort of so soft. Effectively, the bed former had discs that went in the paths, flicked up soil into the beds, and then had like a hook tine rotavator that smashed up the soil into tiny pieces, and a heavy roller on the back. But yeah, very quick. I think we used that for 1 year and very quickly saw similar issues. I mean, it was a really heavy tool implement. Like when you got to the end of the beds, the tractor would always do a wheelie, so you knew it was quite heavy. But also the discs would always do this kind of smearing, even when it was dry. They'd kind of like smear the clay, and yeah, a lot of problems with drainage especially in the pathways. So yeah, fairly quickly became apparent that wasn't great. Also, the beds, they kind of end up slumping pretty quickly, and yeah, I think this idea of, I think back then we were like thought of pathways as just a means of getting down the beds, but otherwise were a bit of an inconvenience, just another bit that you have to hoe. Now we think of them much more differently, and obviously like crops don't just stick to the beds, their roots don't just stick to the beds, they don't just go down. So looking after the pathways is a really important thing. So yeah, I think we basically decided after using the bed former, I think it was then that we there was a 2-wheel tractor for sale quite near us, and they were being talked about. That was I think I got the JM Fortier book and thought, oh, this looks exciting. So picked up the 2-wheel tractor and started using that. So over a couple of years, we converted the beds we basically decided not to use the Massey tractor in the market garden anymore. And we would convert all the beds to narrow beds. So they were kind of 1.2 meters wide, and then now they're 30 inches, 75 centimeters wide, based on the implements of the 2-wheel tractor. We did a lot of broad forking when over those couple of years when we converted the beds to narrower beds. And early on, we got a rotary plough for raising the beds still, but we fairly quickly we maybe used that for a couple of years, and then I just thought one day, like, what's the point in this? Again, like the beds, they end up slumping. So unless you're doing it every time you flip a bed for new crops, which is a lot of cultivation actually, then it just seemed a bit of a waste of time. Another part of the process that wasn't really that useful. So we stopped using the rotary plough, and we just used we have a power harrow on the 2-wheel tractor that we were just using. So we've gone from ploughing every spring and using the tractor, the power harrow on the tractor to cultivate, to this point of just using the 2-wheel tractor, still using the plastic for prepping early beds, but doing that for much shorter periods of time. So we're aiming. The difficulty is obviously for prepping beds early in the year, the ground is a lot colder. The biological activity is a lot slower. So killing off old weeds in crops just takes more time if you're using black plastic. We found that usually 6 weeks is fine if we're aiming for like a mid-March planting. Doing it at the beginning of February allows just enough time for the crops and weeds and green manures to be killed off. And so that's what we started doing. And in combination with that, we started experimenting a lot more with green manures and undersowings. And so what our aim was basically to have, for as long a period of time as possible through the autumn and winter, is to have a fairly diverse mix of living roots in the soil. And then, for early beds, we would mow that off, say, very beginning of February, and black plastic, and then take the plastic off mid-March and plant into that. And as the spring goes on, we would do the same, but we would just shorten that period of time that the plastic's on there for. So ideally, we don't want it on for any longer than a month. And as the spring gets warmer and the soil gets warmer and soil life starts becoming more active again, you don't need it on for as long as when it's colder in the winter. So lots of undersowings, and we have a real focus of we'll be doing lots over the next few weeks, undersowings and oversowings, and we have part of our cropping plan. There's very detailed stuff about what the mixes are and the technique used. So, say for example, let's say fennel. At the moment, we've done loads of plantings recently over the last few weeks for autumn veg. Fennel is one example where we'll have planted it, say, a week or two ago. We'll aim to hoe it a week after planting, and then a week after that, we usually oversow with a green manure mix and then hoe that in, so that acts as a second hoeing, but it also kind of rakes the seed into the soil, and then the green manure grows up very slowly amongst the fennel. The fennel, a lot of the fennel we sell as baby fennel or sort of small fennel, selling to stuff like that for us, especially selling to restaurants, but also we can put them in the veg bags. Just having them in the ground for slightly less time, we can still sell it basically at a pretty high price. So it works for us doing that, selling them smaller. And then once the bed's all cleared, the green manure is there, and that starts growing more through the autumn as well. And then there's a decent covering over winter. And so we'll do that with things, loads of stuff. Even some of the salads later on as well. And when some of the later lettuce outside is coming to the end, we'll just broadcast the green manure straight over the crop when we've done a final cut from it. Broadcast the green manure over the top, and then just flail mow that, and all the clippings from the lettuce sort of acts as a kind of mulch for the seed, the green manure seed, and that all germinates. And like later in the autumn and into September with the heavy dews and stuff, there's pretty much always enough moisture for that to have good germination, especially when it's covered from the residue from the crop. Works really well. Shit. That first page went so quickly, I thought right, I'll just slow down now. No, it's fine. I think it's fine. That was just a bit of a shock. Time just went then. Shit. Okay. This is basically an example of the skim tillage, but using the two-wheel tractor as well. So you can sort of see here the residues of the basically mown down old crops and green manures there, and just skimmed over really lightly with the power harrow. And when we're doing that, we're not normally not going any deeper than about an inch. And this is a useful tool for us if it's a bit drier, and then we'll go over it again if there's a period of dry for a couple of weeks or something. Okay, actually, it's looking better than I thought because that page was done. This year, we have actually brought the tractor back into the garden a few times. We got a springtime cultivator with a crumbler roller in the back, and because it's been so dry, we've been using that. It's basically been difficult if we haven't allowed enough time to plastic beds before the next crop, and we need to prep a bed quickly because the crop's ready to be planted into it. We'll mow it springtime and then go through the power harrow. Basically, because it's so dry and solid, the power harrow will just bounce about and won't do what we need. So the springtime, it's still not going deep, but it effectively helps the power harrow go into the soil. So you can sort of see the lines where the springtime went, and then we've gone over with the power harrow to sort of prep a seed bed there. This was just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so I think it's important to say again, kind of like I was saying before, there's not we're not rigid in the way we do things. We have sort of systems that seem to work, but then also try out new things, or if it's a particularly dry year or a particularly wet year, then we'll try and adapt to that. This is just a picture of some no-dig beds that we have that have been no-dig for probably 10 years or so. And these, we treat these very similarly to the others, other than the fact that we mulch the paths with, usually with kind of semi-composted wood chip, so that the darker strips are the paths there. And then we'll we'll mow and plastic. We don't top up the beds with compost. What's actually happened over the last few years is that the paths are higher than the beds, which is kind of like feels slightly weird, but it's fine. And we put these beds, there's I think there's 11 of them in total. We put these down in the kind of worst, the most poorly drained patch of the garden, because we thought, well, let's do them no dig, and we don't have to wait for it to drain out. So in the spring, because we don't need to get on and cultivate them. And actually, I would say they've become the probably the best drained beds in the garden now. So yeah, it's definitely very effective, but we wouldn't be able to do this in all of the garden wouldn't be enough. I think the wood chip actually has been a massive part of it as well. Not just the fact that we're not cultivating. You get that kind of sponginess from walking on the paths with the wood chip paths, even when it's really wet. In the polytunnels, we haven't cultivated in the tunnels. I think I did when we put some of the tunnels up originally, but otherwise haven't cultivated in the tunnels. They've always been no dig. Kind of a lot easier in tunnels because you can manage the moisture of the soil and stuff. So it's just always found it easier to manage them no dig. This is an example of a tunnel gone crazy a couple of years ago. We were experimenting with lots of undersowings and stuff in there, but it's also an example of so that was on the same day. That was it, just mown down. I just mowed it all, and we did actually black plastic that bed, that tunnel, straight over. We watered and then put the black plastic on, and left it on for about a week, I think, before planting. But the tunnels, normally what we'll do in there is we'll just mow. We usually mow and hoe, and then plant straight into there. And what we've done over the last couple of years in the tunnels is we're just using overhead irrigation for watering in tunnels now on all crops. That's all we do. We don't use any drip tape, and we've found way better, healthier crops. The soil, you haven't got that kind of concrete soil that you're trying to plant into, that we used to get. I think really it's a combination of mowing. So what we used to do is take out the crops and put them on the compost. So now we're just mowing them, and they're kind of, I guess, effectively composting in situ. And then keeping the soil moist is allowing soil life to move much more freely. So it's a lot more active in the top parts of the soil. And it's much sort of fluffier, nicer soil, and the crops are reacting to it in a very positive way, definitely. Obviously, got to be really on it with timing of the irrigation to avoid fungal problems. Another part of what we've done more recently is we've added in movable polytunnels. So we move one of these every year. So we have 3 now, and they effectively, one of them leapfrogs the other 2. And this is kind of, we compost these beds each year, and then in between the tunnels we have long-term green manures as well. So that's kind of a block as well that's fairly, it's kind of a key fertility part of the rotation. The main reason for getting these tunnels was to increase our. We get a lot of mildews. We're in a valley, and a lot of mildew on the autumn salad, and it was to increase a bit more of the salad in the autumn, the brassicas, because with our permanent tunnels, we're using as many beds as we could as part of the rotation as brassicas. So we wanted just a bit more space for those. And they're used for early crops as well. Crops that we would have planted quite early, and often every now and again, every few years, they do really well, but every now and again, they just get slugged and it would be pointless. So they've been really effective for that. And then quickly, I will just cover this new field that we took on, 2022. We've sort of gone back to what we used to do. So we've got someone to plough, and then we cultivate with the power harrow on the tractor. So the idea for this field was to produce more autumn and winter veg for our veg box scheme, because we buy in through the autumn and winter to supplement our own stuff. So I guess it was kind of like the initial idea was like, we'll kind of go field scale with this, but then we quickly fairly quickly realised that wasn't going to work in this kind of shaped field. It was also really sloped, and would have been a bit annoying to mechanise with planters and weeders. So it's a kind of we're cultivating with the tractor, but it's all still planted and weeded by hand. We basically, the first year we took it on, that was quite dry, and things grew really well. We just cultivated that top bit of the field. Then the next year we cultivated a much bigger part of it. That was quite a wet year, and it was like, oh right, this field isn't actually that great. Drainage is really problematic, more so than the market garden. So we put in some long-term green manures, lots of chicory in there, which we graze these with some sheep that we have, and we've sort of we've scaled back in the field. This year was the first year that we didn't plough, and we were using similar approaches to what we started doing in the market garden, which was kind of this skim tillage that I talked about. And this year it worked really well because it was particularly dry, so we could get on and use the spring tines and then power harrow to prep the beds. And we've gone back to using the horror of Mypex. So it's loads of docks and cooch. Cooch is a big problem in the field. So I decided to get some Mypex again and use that for certain areas. So we're doing the squash through that. This was a photo this week of the squash. And then we grew the shallots through Mypex as well on specific areas that were particularly weedy with these perennial weeds. So I'm hoping that will help with that. So basically, what we're aiming to do in the field is kind of create this balance this balance of weakening the perennial weeds so that they're less of an issue, but then maintaining good soil health. We're doing a lot of undersowing of the brassicas and the sweet corn, and lots of pathways as well with mixes of green manures. And then a real joy in the field this year actually has been letting loads of the chicory go to seed, and all the finches on that. It's unbelievable. I think there were about 100. It was just this tiny, it's like probably a 30 metre by 3 metre patch here that I didn't mow down. Usually when we mow green manures and stuff, we'll just mow bits and keep certain bits flowering, so there's always stuff flowering. And then that we actually just let seed. And yeah, that was amazing, or it still is. And these are the things that kind of interest me. They're not the things that make money, but I guess they're the reason that I still do what we do. So, yeah. I suppose in conclusion, it's probably fair to say that our focus isn't on making money. However, obviously that's like really important for the business to keep going. And it's also become, I'd say, more important over the last few years because it seems to be harder and harder. But yeah, it's more about adapting to changes, observing what's working, and all of that, and not having this like one approach thing. So trying new things all the time. That's also what keeps it interesting for me. And then lastly, like also keeping it interesting for the team as well, and trying to create an environment that's beautiful, interesting, diverse, and like a good place to work. That's like a really key part of what we do. So, what's the title of the session again? Yeah, it wasn't quite no dig. But hopefully I've given you a bit of an idea of the changes over the years and why we've made those. What's the How much time? Sorry, I've classically run longer than I would have hoped. Yeah. Does anyone have questions?
Thank you very much. No, that's been really good, comprehensive run through, and hopefully there will be some questions. I can see 2 or 3 hands. Okay, so you can say your name and where you're from. That would be good.
Yeah, sure. I'm Angus. I'm from South Wales on a little market garden. I wanted to ask what are you using in your undersowing or oversowing mix? Yeah, and how do you make those decisions if it's different at different times?
So I'll try and remember what we're sowing at the moment. Normally, as we get into kind of later into August and September, we stop using so many of the legumes, so a bit more of a focus on. So some of the things will be killed off over winter as well. That's important to say on some of these oversowings. But if you get the timing right on things like Phacelia, that will overwinter if it doesn't get too big. So things like we usually try and get a grain in there or something from that family. So we usually choose oats. We don't tend to use cereal rye in the market garden. That takes a bit longer to kill off with silage plastic, so we've chosen not to use that in the market garden for early beds. So yes, Phacelia, buckwheat, winter linseed, oats. We'll still be sowing yellow trefoil, red clover, white clover, crimson clover, sweet clover. Is there anything else? And then as we get in, and a bit of vetch, and then as we get into later into September, the mix will change, and then we might be, depending on where we're sowing and what the beds are going to be the following year. Yeah, we might add in cereal rye, and then it will become more basically just if there's any beds left as we get into like late September, October, it's pretty much just cereal rye that we use. But yeah, those are the main things that we use through the year, really. Those all the clovers, and then the buckwheat, Phacelia, linseed, oats. They're the big ones. We chuck in like lots of other stuff that we save ourselves as well. So things like coriander, calendula, cornflowers, that sort of thing as well. And then a bit of chicory into the longer term green manures in the field.
Hello, I'm Alice from Tillage in North Wales. I was just really interested in your kind of bed turnaround, mowing and tarping kind of technique, because that's something we're sort of moving towards now in our no-dig. And I was wondering if, when you mow, do you like pull up the crop roots, or do you just mow the whole thing off? Because we've been kind of running in. Well, basically, if we don't pull them up, they kind of get in your way when you're hoeing, and sometimes they resprout. And I was wondering about that.
Yeah, we don't, but some crops, in particular things like chard or perpetual spinach, can be a bit problematic with, or they'll take a bit longer to kill off. What we might do is we might hoe after taking the plastic off. So depending on what, that if there's stuff still alive under there, basically, we'll run the wheel hoe along and just hoe off. But normally we don't have to do that. And we sometimes try and stagger the planting so that you'll see the remnants of old crops. A lot of our spacings on all the salads and lots of the stuff that we do in the market garden is 4 rows on the 75 centimetre bed, 20 centimetres apart in row. And so we'll try and stagger the planting in between the old plants so that they're not right. It's more difficult then, obviously, if we're trying to plant where the previous plant was. But hoeing can be a little bit faffy sometimes when it's like that. But what we've found, I guess a lot of our crops in the market garden are quite quick crops, a fair few of them. So some of them we can allow, we're kind of fine with getting a bit weedy. and especially that's another thing to say. Like as it gets to kind of this time of year and into September, we want the weeds to be there. They're effectively another part of the green manure mix for us to keep more roots in the soil, living roots in the soil. But yeah, we don't tend to. We just mow and plastic, and then if it's really dry, we'll actually water before putting the plastic on as well.
Hello, I'm Jen from West Devon. I was just wondering how this physically smaller members of your team manage with the two-wheel tractor.
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, to be honest, I tend to do it. And that's not being like a chauvinist dick about it. It's more about me sometimes wanting to do things on my own. So maybe it's a benefit of running a business is that you can sometimes choose to go off on your own and do things. And that's my time when I put my Bluetooth headphones on and listen to music. And just I weirdly quite like being on tractors or using machinery. And it's just a little moment. It's also, you know what, actually, I think a part of that as well is because I tend to do it at the end of the day when everyone finishes work at 4. And I usually work a bit longer, but actually not that much longer anymore. And so I'll do it then, and it's because it's noisy and stuff. People don't, it's nicer not having machinery going during the day. So yeah, it is a struggle. People do find it not very easy, the two-wheel tractor, definitely. And it's probably, not been great for me with my back. But I guess, maybe when you use it more and more over the years, you kind of find out the techniques to use it a bit more effectively, where it's not gonna where you're not kind of like wrestling with it, but you kind of like leave it be, let it go on its own path. But yeah, it's a really good point, and maybe definitely something to think about if you're considering using one. We borrowed one for a while as well, which was really useful.
Oh, I was just going to add to that because I initially hated the BCS, but like regularly servicing it and keeping the tires really well pumped and being trained really well on how to use it. Initially it was like a massive struggle, but then I was like, oh, it's just because the tires were really flat and some other things. But like, if you can get people to show you how to use it properly, then it's not so physical, actually.
I'll be, if we're out of time, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
I'll just stick around if anyone's got more questions as well.
Wonderful. Well, can we all give a big hand for Ash?